You're listening to the Forest School podcast with Lewis Ames and Gemma Southerden.
And a massive thanks to our current patrons, Simon Kenny, Joe H, Brona Steed, Jude Vinson and Chrissy McEvoy. Thank you so much, guys. It really does mean a lot.
Okay.
We've been talking for a while. I've been hiding something under the camera's view.
What?
Are you ready?
Yeah.
Are you ready?
Yeah. Oh my God. What is it?
I got a crow caller.
Oh.
It looks horrendous. Doesn't that look
Yeah.
phallic beyond phallic?
I wouldn't describe that as a crow over the internet.
I think it said rook or raven, possibly. It was like Corvidae family.
Right, okay.
Also, I'm not very good at it yet.
Okay.
Takes a bit of, apparently you have to roll your R and stuff.
Oh right. That's exciting.
I'm not quite getting it, but it sounds, if you go a bit funny, it just sounds
yeah.
like Orville. But
yeah, but there was
kind of-
something there that
Now it just sounds like one of those cow tippy things.
oh yeah.
Yeah, I thought it was
Nice to add to your collection.
to add to my collection of, well, I mean, the collection at the moment is just a blackbird thing, isn't it?
Oh, there was another one that someone else showed us that was really nice though, wasn't there? I was forgetting that didn't belong to us.
Yes.
That was good.
That was good. It's dark already. It's 5 o'clock and it is pitch black outside.
I know, but I've decided I like it. I've decided
Leaning into the hugger.
I'm leaning into it. I'm leaning into darker evenings, which mean that you have to sort of stay indoors and not feel guilty about it, and then maybe verge on doing something kind of creative. Because, definitely.
I think I still have a bit of guilt in that I still maybe feel like, oh, the world's kind of opening up. Like we should get out and do, especially my children are, 2 and 4, like, and the oldest one's just, because he's just not gone to school, if that makes sense. So he would he's old enough to have gone to school this September. So I've got all of this like interesting kind of stuff going on where I'm like, oh, I should be providing a lot more, which feels harder in the winter because I am not wealthy enough to go to science club and then football club and then this thing and flip out and then so it's an interesting, I think it'll be an interesting winter for me with the ages my children are.
Yeah, definitely. I found that when we were full-time home editing, in that we went to loads more groups in the winter than we did in the summer, and in fact lots of the groups that we had closed down in the summer because nobody turned up, once parent run ones that were free, in somebody's barn or on a football pitch or whatever, they were great through the winter, and then they were like nobody comes because they just like go to the beach in the summer or stay home and do crazy art in their sunny garden, stuff like that.
Cool. Well, it kind of leads into the topic that I've suggested I want to talk about, because my go-to has become like, okay, you can watch slightly more TV, kids, but I'm gonna download like Bill Nye, or I'm gonna download. Do you know Super Y?
No.
It's like a step on from Alpha Blocks and phonics and stuff. So it's more to do with like reading. But basically, I've tried to go, how educational can I make this like screen time?
Yeah.
Whilst being 2 and 4. And so it was kind of prompted in my head. Then I said to you, would you fancy talking about, the first word I came up with, consumption addiction.
Or content addiction.
Content addiction. Yeah.
And I was like, what's that then? And then you described it to me and I was like, yes, I have that.
Yeah. What did I write? Can I find the description of what I wrote? So I wrote, I was defining it as a need to consume content and media over and above relaxation/pleasure, i.e. always needing to have something on or to stay up to date or to be bettering yourself through content consumption, possibly at the expense of creating/inward facing activities.
Yes, that is it. Spot on. I also was trying to do some research about it today, and I also came across it being called compulsive information seeking. And I thought, yes, it's also that. The internet provides users with a wealth of data and knowledge. For some, the opportunity to find information so easily has turned it into an uncontrollable urge to gather and organize data. It's in some cases, information seeking is a manifestation of pre-existing obsessive compulsive tendencies, but it can also reduce work productivity, blah, 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 Yes.
Can I tell you an example of that comes up in my life quite frequently? And I had to learn this about myself, which is that like me and, people in the UK will know Gogglebox. So this is going to make no sense for people outside the UK, but basically we have a TV show, a long running TV show here where we watch other people watch TV, right? It's mind numbing, but you're watching people and then you're sort of listening to them make comments about the shows and, oh, isn't he fit? Or I can't believe she did that and all this stuff. And in our house, basically, if there's content on and somebody wants to talk to me, I have had to learn that like, I just have to pause it because I can't deal with. So if my wife, she can have like an audiobook on or a podcast on and then ask me something about dinner and then talk to the kids or something. The second someone asks me something, if I've got a podcast, so if I've got it on my headphones, I pause it. If it's playing out loud to the room because I thought I was in the room on my own, if someone like comes and talks to me, I'm like, pause it. I can't deal with missing part of it.
That's really interesting you say that because I am exactly the same, and exactly the same thing happens in my house, where we had it exactly last night. So I was trying to buy something on the internet that we really needed and we procrastinated about not buying it for years. I was like, we're doing it. My other half said, let's sort this thing out. I was like, great. And then he turned the telly on and I was like, okay, well, I found it now. Do we want this one or this one? And he was like watching. I was like, just turn just press pause, mute, telly off. Like I cannot do this. And so it wasn't for the same reasons, I don't think, as you're describing, but it's like a channel thing. I can't, like, either I'm tuned into the information of the podcast, like music is fine. I can deal with music, but if it's any kind of talking, if it's the radio or a podcast or the telly, I cannot then do anything else. I'm so engaged in that thing. I can't. No, that's not true. I can multitask in terms of I can cook, but I can't. The language part of my brain can't function.
Well, we've talked before, haven't we, about sub-vocalizing. Like when you read something, do you hear it in a voice in your head, or do you just take the information in? And I think it's to do with, if you do that, you can't have another load of information going, because like you say, it's almost like there's only so much bandwidth in the language bit, and you're like, no, it's taken up now. But I think there's something else going on for me, which is like, if it's something like that comes out regularly for me, so like a podcast or like a YouTube channel that I follow or something, there's something about, like, in the same way that I wouldn't go to a film and like have a chat to someone in the middle of the film, like to the cinema. I mean, I wouldn't deal with chatting. I wouldn't deal with stuff like that, because I'd be going, no, this is really important. The experience of like consuming this in one go is really important. And I sort of feel like that about podcasts and stuff like that, where you're like, okay, for me, it's like, I need to enjoy every moment of this, because some of the podcasts I listen to, they don't come out for another month. So I've got to like enjoy all of it while it's happening, and not be like, oh, I missed a bit because we were talking or we're doing.
Find out about CPD courses at childrenoftheforest.com. Check out the podcast links for more details.
Yes.
Well, I've just reflected while you've been talking about that. It's interesting that you have that approach, because I don't really. I can stop and start it and do it piecemeal, and it's the kind of thing I wish that I could listen to or watch in a single thing, and then I never end up doing it. And also I get really distracted, and I have got about 5 windows open. I cannot sit still and watch a YouTube thing. I have it playing and then I open something else and blah blah blah. But I have noticed that you are really able, after you've consumed like a podcast or whatever, you're able to remember it so amazingly, and then you use it. So I'm not surprised that you're kind of addicted to it in your own view. You're saying you're addicted to it, right? I'm not labeling you But then you just use it like instantly with a group or with me. You're like, I watched this thing and they said this, whereas I'd be like, I watched this really cool thing. It said something about something that I can't remember. That's the end of the story now, because I can't remember any of the facts. Whereas you kind of almost photographically like ingest it and then use it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. I think I've known that about myself for a little while. I think when I was younger, I thought I was clever, and actually, I think what it is that I've got a really good memory. So, like reading books, consuming media, that stuff just does stay in my head really well. But there's something about, like, I think that's why I enjoy doing the work that we do, because there is no option to like have a podcast on unless I'm doing the like woodland management side of stuff, which I get loads out of, being able to be like, I'm in the woods on my own and like nobody's going to interrupt me and I can just listen to it. But the sort of day-to-day running of stuff, you have to be in the moment. It drags you out of whatever's going on, away from screens, away from everything else, and sort of goes, okay, deal with that now.
But do you think on the flip side, I mean, maybe if we were in completely different careers, maybe we'd also be doing the same thing. But I wonder whether being in our field of work also encourages kind of information seeking and compulsively, because it's such a wide field of work, and like a child or a learner can arrive with like a special interest in something that you know nothing about, and so you feel like you need to go and research that. Or they say that they want to do something, like some kind of woodworking, and you want to research about that and find out. Do you know what I mean? It's got you're constantly training yourself all the time, rather than just going, I know how to do it and I'll just do the same thing all the time. So I definitely feel like I spend a huge amount of time online, like learning, even if it's stuff I don't end up using. I'll be like, I've heard that you can do, whether it's sparked by a Facebook group about Forest School and someone says, we did this cool thing, I'm like, I need to find out about that and see if that will be good for my group. And then half the time you don't or I feel like I don't necessarily always use the information I've found, but I think that really encourages it. And I wonder if there's anyone listening who feels the same way and feels like they're constantly, and even books, the amount of books that I buy, either new or secondhand, because I think, that's going to have really useful information in it. It's going to help me. And then my bookshelves are falling.
I wonder if people who have that thing, because I think if you're passionate about doing Forest School, I think you are that sort of person. And like by default, that's just how you end up doing this passionately, is you have to be super interested. Which I wonder if that's healthy, mental health wise and physical health wise. And I think it's worth circling back to that. Because the other thing that's occurred to me is like that feeling of like guilt that accompanies it. So my Audible library is full of very, very heavy books about like deep stuff about child psychology, or really heavy stuff about mycological research or something, anthropology and stuff like this. And I have so many moments where I just flick through them all, because actually my brain is knackered, but I can't let myself have junk food. Like I can't let myself have junk content. So I go like, I've got to be listening to something worthy. I better be reading something worthy. And then I don't enjoy, a lot of the time I'm listening to it going, I'm not going to enjoy the first 5 minutes of this until it like hooks me back in again. You just have to go, this is going to be like dry as crackers and sand. And that sort of affects your downtime in a massive way, I think. Like just that feeling of one of the things that I've heard lots of people say who are self-employed is like that difficulty in not turning everything that you have as a hobby into a job, because we're that way inclined. So for some people it's like, I know how to start a like I don't know, company X, and then they get interested in a certain sport and they go, oh, well, I'll just transfer all my skills over and I'll start doing that. And then it kills the hobby. Yeah. So like maybe part of this is about like learning to not kill your hobbies. And is that something you've...
Completely. And I think we've done a whole podcast about it, I think, at one point. This conversation kind of rings bells for me. But definitely it's because, you know, you choose the job because you love the elements of it. And then therefore it's like all consuming. And I definitely know what you mean about that guilt thing, for sure. Absolutely. And when we were talking about recording this podcast, I was like, yeah, but you're going to tell me like how to fix this, right? You're going to tell me like how to not have this addiction on one hand and guilt on the other. But I did do something last week that I did find really helped because, and I hadn't done it for, basically a friend of a friend is, I think she's like a life counselor and does various kind of therapy stuff. And she's just started doing this thing called Eco Nidra. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that correctly, but it's like, you know, when you lie down and someone guides you through a relaxation thing and kind of guides you through your body, like relax these bits of your body, starting from your head down to your toes or whatever, and your thoughts. And then, and it was 45 minutes long, and I lay on the floor with a weighted blanket. And then I don't know what happened after the like body relaxation thing, because I kind of went into a trance. But then at the end, there were lots of nature sounds. So I think that's the essential bit of the Eco Nidra, is that it's based on, you know, so sounds of nature in your relaxation that's supposed to have a really profound effect on you. Bloomin' hell, it really did. It was absolutely crazy. I'd never experienced that kind of deep relaxation with absolutely doing nothing, but you're not asleep. And the effects lasted for ages. And like for a week, I didn't need to listen to a podcast to go to sleep. It was like my body remembered what it was to be relaxed and to not have any guilt and not be going, I should be doing something. I should be, bettering myself. I could be using this time to, you know. And so I think, you know, afterwards I was like, I really needed to do that. And I need to do this regularly to physically relax myself and mentally not be new information, must be getting new things, you know, for sure. Because that guilt you're describing affects my reading of books all the time as well. So I love reading, but I feel like all the kind of fiction that I want to read that I know is amazing, as I'm reading it, I'm going, I should really be reading some like non-fiction research on play or whatever.
Have I told you about when my experience of at primary school, and my literacy teacher had, it must have been in someone, it was called like the reading tree or like the reading rainbow. And I must have been 9 or 10. And it was this idea of like you progressed through whatever, but you had to read like, you know, a murder mystery book, a non-fiction book, a something book, you know, and something, whatever. And I was consistently only reading sci-fi books and non-fiction. Mm-hmm. And I remember the teacher being like, why don't you read like a book about, you know, this fantasy thing, or why don't you read this story book about, and I just remember going, but they didn't happen. So what's the point in reading them? Because they're not true. I like the non-fiction books because they're real and they happened and they, you know, yeah, there's something about that getting in. I wonder if I think it's definitely more of a thing now for our learners than it was for you and I. I knew we grew up at slightly different times, but basically this stuff didn't exist. The idea that you could, I think now about how many times I would have watched the same, for me, it would have been like a videotape of a film. Would have watched that film because we would have had 3 videotapes, and you sort of, that like natural boredom that comes from a scarcity that then makes you go, I can't deal with it anymore. I can't, you know, even as a child. Whereas now there's so much I see it, you know, for my own kids, but also for learners that come to our sessions. You know, there is so much to consume over and over and over again. Absolutely.
And it's like, I guess the kind of young child equivalent maybe of finding out everything you can about a certain topic that we might do is, you know, watching every episode of Paw Patrol that is available back to back, and then being able to talk to somebody at an incredible depth about the episode where this happened, and well, actually this character is really good at this, and you know, in a way that we weren't necessarily, even with programs that we really loved, they were on, well, for me anyway, once a week. And there probably only were about 12 episodes of any one thing, because that's where it was. It wasn't there are 1,200 episodes. And so it's almost like, well, if you're interested in that thing, you really can become the absolute expert on it very easily. In fact, it's easier to do that than it is to kind of have a wider variety of inputs. And I wonder what effect that has on the brain. That's really interesting. It might be a positive effect. It might be like a real,
I think there used to be
dive into things.
But there used to, I mean, there is a trope, isn't there, of this is a sweeping statement, so like sweeping statement warning of boys going through a stage between sort of like 7 and 12 being like obsessive and like encyclopedic about a certain thing. So, you know, for me, it was like Pokemon. I'm going to learn about every single Pokemon. I'm going to know all the, you know, but like before, you know, in previous generations, that would have been butterfly collecting, or, you know, all the people that would have collected stamps or collected like that, like collecting thing still exists in us, but it's been kind of, I'm going to sound like Russell Brand. It's been commercialized so that our need for consumption and collection can be monetized. Park life. Sorry, do you know that one?
No.
If you take anything Russell Brand says, you just wait for him to finish a sentence and then you just put Park Life at the end of it. No?
Like the Blur
good
song.
One. Like the Blur song. It works. Listen to anything he says. Anyway, yeah, that compulsive thing of like collecting and encyclopedic knowledge about a certain area obviously goes back time immemorial, and like, you know, to a certain extent that is really useful at that age. You're probably naturally moving into some sort of adulthood and going, okay, I need some stability. Lots of the world is unknown to me right now. Am I a child? Am I an adult? What's going on? Okay, I'm going to get something concrete. I'm going to get something that's like familiar.
Yeah, and it's like schemas, which I've said this to you before. So if you think about schemas, if people don't know what that is, give it a Google. It's loads of people who work in early years will know exactly what I'm on about. But when little tiny children are involved in schemas, that is because the universe is so massive and life is so incredibly huge and incomprehensible that they reckon that the theory of schemas is that, you know, you might be in a trajectory schema, which means that you're looking at how things you're throwing and looking at how they fall, and then that applies across your life. And that's a way of kind of piecemeal comprehending the universe. And I often think about like special interests, or like you're describing this kind of collection thing of being like an extension of that older children and adults in terms of, as you say, like this is something I can hang the world on. How does it, you know, how do things
the rules are very concrete. It's very predictable to a certain degree. It's like I can learn this and I can stay in this thing.
Yeah, and things that happen in the rest of the world remind me of that thing, and it's just like when that happened in that thing, you know. So it kind of gives me a frame on which things, like you say. I was going to say something else.
Well, I think that's one of the things that makes it interesting in terms of like, because if we think of the antithesis of consumption, it's creation, isn't it?
Yes, and that's what I was going to say. If you're consuming, you're not creating. That I only heard that sentence the other day for the first time, and it blew my mind. My friend who's doing a PhD in education posted it, and I was like, oh shit, man, you're completely right. And that is why, you know, before probably in the last couple of years, I've become so fixated on consuming new information, researching things, learning things on my phone or on the computer, that my creativity is just like in the bin, and it's not good. But you feel so worthy when you're doing it. You feel like you're, as you say, bettering yourself, but there's nothing to show for it. There's no reward at the end of it apart from the kind of dopamine, I guess, of like finding the information and going, oh, bingo, found that. Oh, that's interesting. Oh, especially for me, who I forget a lot of the stuff that I've read anyway. It's like, well, I could do that, or I could have been making something that brought me great joy and furthering my skill. It's not like it's not work related either. I could have been whittling a great spoon.
Support the podcast today by becoming a Patreon member at childrenoftheforest.com. Check out the podcast links for more details.
So where do we put this in terms of sessions? And if we park our own baggage for a minute and we take learners and we go, okay, if they're consuming, then they're not creating. So do you think we have a duty to, or do you think we have like a role to play in nudging that needle? Because one of the things that's been occurred to me for a long time now is like, so our work with the home ed community, we meet some learners that are fresh out of the school system, and we meet some that have been home educating either their whole life or for whatever reason. And so for those that are coming out of the school system, we're quite often involved in that, like they call it unschooling, don't they? That like relearning how the world works and what education can look like and all these things. And so sometimes that means lots more structure, lots more kind of like, okay, we're going to piece the meal the day out. And also like sort of, I would refer to them as like familiar playground games. Those like games that they're very simple. They've got very set rules, like hide and seek, or can we play manhunt, or can we play I don't know, bulldog across the, and that stuff that I think people who've been out of the school system for longer, who've had longer time to play, maybe the school system's not important, but maybe it's like long periods of uninterrupted play bring you to different games, bring you to games that are a bit more complicated, or involve a bit more role play, or involve using the environment in some sort of different way. Maybe that's what it is. Maybe a lot of playground games involve a large flat area and not a lot else. And so I've been wondering about whether, so we're meeting needs by going, okay, you need to play like to it, right? Take it down to like its most basic form. You need to play it, you need to play tag, right? And are we doing a disservice if we like repeatedly over and over and over again, are they like consuming our game of tag? Are they consuming, or like, so we've recently had some games where to try and like move a group together, I go, okay, you guys all go down there, I'll sneak up on the castle, I'll be the monster, or I'll go and do whatever. And it works and it's great and everybody gets loads out of it. But I'm always constantly going like, okay, at what point are they kind of, where's the line of dependency? Where's the line of like, this play doesn't work without me? They need to consume my part in the play. I'm waffling. Does that make sense?
No, but I know what you mean. In a way, I'm not necessarily saying I do, but you could view the kind of play that you're describing as quite passive and needing a lot of input from you in that situation, or from the structure of the game. Like, we just follow the game, we follow the rules of it, and that's what we do because that's what we understand, and it doesn't really involve any kind of active creativity on our part. And I'm including creativity, not just physical practical creativity, but imaginative kind of like, oh, we could change the rules, we could do this, we could do that, we could do the other. Some children aren't at that stage and they're just in that. I do know what you mean about kind of equating those kind of repetitive games with a sort of.
Can I read a definition for you that clicked something for me? So I forget where this is from. So it said a system of increasing interest in these and other behavioral addictions. So it was a piece talking about like lots of things are getting labeled addictions now. And so it said like gaming, sex, or the internet. And this has resulted in a broadening of definitions about what addiction is. Psychologists talk of excessive appetites and powerful motivational drives to engage in particular behaviors that have the power to do considerable unintended harm.
Mm-hmm.
which I just think is a really interesting. It's like part of that is it's a particular behavior and it's unintended harm.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's part of where I would see. So if we go back to talking about the content consumption that you and I do, it's unintended harm. We're not intending to give up our free time. We're not intending to like make ourselves feel rubbish. We're intending all the best outcomes of it. And like, I wonder if learners have the same thing of like, my intentions are that I just need to meet this need. I just need to scratch this itch, not realizing the potential long-term harm or the potential, you know?
Yeah, I do know what you mean. I was thinking also about kind of maybe more physical creativity as well, and thinking about maybe whether if you took the kind of, you know, as similar a group of kids as possible across, you know, cross section like we might work with now, but from 30 years ago, and looked at their kind of physical creativity in Forest School, whether it would be this, whether it would be similar or whether it would be very different, because I do feel like there are quite a lot of learners that we often come across in whatever environment, in the woods, in schools, wherever, who who lack confidence in their own physical skills to be creative, whether that be, oh, you know, can you draw this thing for me? I can't draw it. I can't draw it. Or making something out of clay and kind of struggling for the inspiration and what to make a lot of the time, and whether that's normal for that age group, in inverted commas. I mean, what is normal? But whether that's changed or not, and what our place in that is in terms of Forest School, because if children from an early age are now consuming way more content than they were 30 years ago, for example, which, as you described, that whole boredom thing of like, oh, well, you know, the program's finished now and I don't like this next program that's on the 4 channels or on TV, turn it off and do something else and just like muck about with stuff until something happens, which is kind of like a sort of Forest School approach, isn't it? Like muck about and see what happens. Yeah. But I'm wondering whether there's two approaches. If we acknowledge that maybe a lot of children do need support with their kind of physical creativity, there's, on the one hand, you could approach that need and go, it is about tinkering, it is about mucking around, it is about like constant exposure and availability to resources which could be taken in many different directions with no outcome that's prescribed. It's just, you know, develop the muscles in your hands, like develop the hand-brain connection, which is so necessary for creativity. Is like, oh, I've made this, like, that's surprising. What happens if I... And
that's all very noble, because I feel like there's probably a percentage of parenting that wasn't thinking, like, can you develop the muscles in your hands? It was like, shut up and go over there, I need to do dinner. And that's when loads of stuff happens, isn't it?
Completely. And, you know, being way more physical generally. But then you could say about gaming as well, I guess, is kind of developing hands.
Well,
but anyway,
I wonder if...
can I just finish that thought very quickly? Because that is probably, you know, and we talk about that kind of approach at Forest School a lot, of that kind of just tinkering, we're just playing, there's no prescribed outcome, the pressure's off, just play, you know, with the stuff. But then maybe some learners actually need the opposite. Maybe some, because they haven't had that, like, from the beginning to a finished product, you know, they very rarely had that. Maybe some learners actually need, like, we are making the thing from the book. And we also have met learners like that, haven't we? In terms of like, because I have no experience in making things, how could I possibly just play and come up with something that I get a sense of reward and achievement from? I actually need to follow step by step, and I need you to support me with it. Yeah. And I need to do it, you know, it needs to be manageable and finishable. So I've got a thing. And then I understand what creativity is. And after I've done that a few times, then I can maybe go to the other side of it and just muck about. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah definitely. I was wondering about whether, so we're talking about, when you were talking about the physicality side of it, and I was wondering about whether, like, so I know a few people that have worked in like more closely in the like physical development of children and stuff, and they have told me that one of the things that they find interesting, or they have to work with children, this is more teenagers, is understanding the difference between the feeling of exertion and the feeling of injury. And that feeling of like having used your body, and if you're not used to it, then you're going to be like, my legs hurt, and it's like that bit in the Matrix, like, no, you've never used them before. It's
that's so funny, because that's exactly what like my new physical trainer lady says.
Right.
So session 1 of this like outdoor boot campy thing that I've started going to now, she had to say exactly that to us as adults. She was like, I want you to really think about the difference between those things, because like in the sessions we get pushed really hard, but obviously she doesn't want us to injure ourselves, but she does want us to really go for it and not be hesitant, because it won't work if you're hesitant and going, oh no, that hurts. She's like, it will hurt, but there's difference between work and pain.
That's that, like, we talked about in a previous episode, that interoception thing of like knowing the feelings in your body, and that's a sensitivity thing that people will lose if they passively consume. But I wondered if your brain is getting the similar thing. So if you watch action films, does your brain feel like you've done some jumping, you did some running, you escaped the Nazis or whatever it was, in a way that means that your body doesn't actually engage with it? And then one thing I was looking at was like, what's changed about consumption recently that makes it different? So like you and I were saying about, there being a limited amount of videos, or literally children's TV stops at 7 o'clock or whatever it is. And so I was reading some stuff about that, like endless scrolling, just the endless, there's always a next recommended thing. There's always so I had this immediate thought of like, oh God, you're right. That's how they like keep you trapped, because there's always another thing to watch. There's always another. And then I reframed it and I was like, that's transitions. That's because when you stop watching a thing, you have to transition. You have to go, I'm no longer like watching TV, and now it is time to do the dishwasher. Or quite often it's a shitty task. It's like, I've had my little reward of watching something on my phone, and now you must, I don't know, go fold those things, or go and clean that sick up or something. And like, so not just because it's obviously something that's affecting learners, but also affecting adults, is like that lack of transition, and being in a space where that no transition is coming until the almighty transition comes. Do you know what I mean? It builds and builds and builds, doesn't it?
And it's always, and that's interesting that with children, because the content they're consuming is when they're consuming never-ending content, like TV that just automatically plays the next episode, or YouTube, or video games that they can just carry on, like replay the level or carry on Minecraft or whatever, with no fixed endpoint, then the transition then is often initiated by an adult. And that's really damaging, because
to the relationship it can be.
Whereas that's exactly what I mean. Whereas your program ending and the next program being boring, like that transition is up to you, isn't it? And you learn all the time. You've got more smaller, lower stakes transitions.
That's what I think it is. I think it's muscle building in transition, that like, if we're not careful, it's something maybe to think about with learners who might like not want to struggle to leave a session, right? I often say that, like, if I wanted to do an advert for our toddler group, I would film the last 5 minutes of just children going, I'm never leaving, you can't make me leave. And like, it's a transition, it's really hard. And maybe that muscle is not getting worked because in an endless cycle of content.
It's not getting worked in your free time. That's what it is, because that children are still in plenty of places and settings where transitions have to happen, but they aren't as much, I would say, in their leisure time transitioning. That would be my, again, sweeping statement, like absolutely zero research done. But those self-managed transitions that are based on internal decisions, like, oh, environmentally, this is boring, or this has happened. It's like, rather than someone telling me it's time for tea, or it's, which we had to deal with, or, children in the past still had to deal with those as well, but they had to make fewer decisions about where am I taking this body right now? What am I going to do with it? What am I going to do with the brain and the hands? And what am I going to look at now? Like, there's fewer of those decisions being made. So how do you practice it? Which makes complete sense, doesn't it? And then we go, welcome to the woods. Basically, like, do what you want. And then they're like, how do I do this?
And also that, so that thing with endless content of like, so we talked about there being so much more volume of content, and so you can just like endlessly watch it, which I sometimes equate to like, if you had the perfect meal, being able to immediately get exactly the same perfect meal again, straight away, no changes, compared to like, you know, if it's like, again, I feel like we're just talking like old people in a retirement. Back in my day, when it was like, you can keep watching the TV, but your program's done. So now it's a different program, which you might like less, or you might like whatever. And in that same way that like consuming the same content over and over again, I've met lots and lots of learners. Can you hear Juniper?
Yeah. Daddy?
Okay, I'm coming in a minute. She's shouting ready, because dinner's ready.
Oh.
I haven't got much more to say, I don't think. So yeah, in that same way as like consuming endless, you know, repeated content, I have met countless learners who really struggle with the idea that like the next time they come to the woods, they might not have exactly the same experience of exactly the same game with exactly the same people with exactly the same result. Or like, I was really enjoying playing Paw Patrol Princesses before break, before we have a snack, and like I want to go and play exactly that again, and other people aren't playing it, and why aren't you making them? I just want to play it again. You know, that kind of maybe expectation that you can have the same dopamine hit over and over again.
Yeah, which, you know, is part of that whole thing that we always say, is that sometimes, you know, sometimes the woods is full of struggle and challenge, and that is good. You know, it's like a sliding scale of support and facilitation that we have to do all the time, and reading the learners and going, okay, they're dysregulated now, or you can see they're a bit distressed about, for example, the change in the game and it not being the same as last time, and to go, okay, I'm going to try and support them with this, but you know, it's good, it's not a bad thing that they're experiencing this challenge. Yeah.
Shall I read now? I found an article by Medium which is called Stop Your Consumption Addiction.
Sure. One second. Oh no, go for it. Sorry. I had a...
Who's hovering?
I had a hovering through the door. There's some kind of communication, but I couldn't understand what it was. Okay, go for it. Go for it.
I'm trying to, it's loaded, hang on. Okay. So steps to stop your consumption addiction. These are very high level. So one is watch it later. Impulse is the perpetrator of bad consumption. Clickbait and catchy thumbnails. So this person then recommends sort of parking everything you want to watch or look at during the day as it comes up, and then giving yourself a dedicated time to go, that is when I will consume. I will consume between 5:30 and 6:30, or
but how do you stop when it gets to 6:30?
Well, so the next one is read it later, and then number 3 is it's just called Infinity Loop, and it says the internet has no end. Has anyone found the end of Facebook, Instagram, or YouTube? It's impossible. You could continue consume with the rest of your life with no sleep, and you still couldn't watch and read everything. So if you catch yourself watching or reading online, create an end point, a manual alarm clock that goes off after 30 minutes, place it far away from you so you have to stand up, and this will disorient you and change your frame of mind. I think I would add on to that. There's loads of things you can do, like loads of apps, loads of smart devices now have built into the like health features, you know, my phone goes into black and white at 8:00 at night, just makes everything super unappealing. It's kind of like, okay, I can watch it, I can look at something if I really need to, but it's rubbish. And things like that I think could be really helpful to kind of nudge. I think I respond better to nudging than like a hard. Have you seen those like phone cages? Have you seen them?
No, but I'm the opposite. If I put a nudge type thing on my phone, I just turn it off.
So you might need one of these cages.
Yes, it's bedtime, but do one to telling me it's bedtime now. Like it's winding down time. Is it, fuck? It's not winding time.
Maybe some sort of demand avoidance, but this is the phone. It's literally you.
It is definitely time to doom scroll, not wind down. Oh, I really want to feel some emotions of worry and dread right now. So I think I'm going to read all about other people's insurance on a Forest School support group.
Do you know what, though? That is something that we should touch on, which is that a lot of adult content is, I don't mean adult content. I have been endlessly watching adult content. Lots of things that adults will like consume has a tinge of like, it gets your worries up, right? So whether that's the news or social media or whatever, there's like an element of depression in there, an air of it. And like lots of children's consumption is like almost the polar opposite. It's like nothing bad. It's either nothing bad ever happens here, happy la la sunshine, or death, murder, come and watch this scary, spooky Halloween game. And like that element of like, I wonder if it would be different. You know, people have tried to make like social media, but only positive, or like only good news channels. Like whether we could genuinely consume positive, happy content endlessly, what that would do to our brains.
Bored.
But
maybe that's good, because maybe then you switch off. Yeah, I was reading I was reading a thing on the internet about reading things on the internet, which was also about reading things on the internet. Which, while I was reading the internet, I thought about reading the internet. It said, so I'm on Facebook. I just join a new Facebook group about something, probably every week.
Oh God.
Yeah, it's lovely. It's a lovely little thing, and but then, and you join them because you want to find information about something or support about something. But then, in order to, once you're part of the group, you see everybody else's requests for information and support. And so a lot of the ones I mean, it's like people telling kind of really emotional stories, like this happened to me, and or this happened to my family, and I want some support. But, you know, and it's like you have to scroll through those things to try and find the answer to some, you know, a question that you actually genuinely have. And no, it's on a training course I did, and they were saying, you know, don't spend you've got finite spoons, you know. All very well if you feel like you've got enough spoons all the time to like reply to strangers' concerns on the internet in various support groups, then that's great. But really keep an eye on it, because even if you don't respond, you're using emotional spoons by reading. You're engaging with it by reading it while you're scrolling through, you know. And that's the point where I've got to with my social media, which is not healthy at all. And it kind of, and the more you engage with it and click on it, you go, oh, I'll just finish reading the end of that story. And obviously it then goes, oh, you like that content, great. So all of my like beach combing, you know, joyful things about like, oh, you guys check out this cool thing I found on the beach, which is, I call that joyful content.
Yeah,
that's all disappeared, and now it's all just like
terror, nightmares.
You know. And a lot of it is stuff I've joined for work. So it's lots, you know, for example, like, you know, trauma-informed stuff or sensory stuff, or, you know, stuff about child development. And loads of it's really, really useful. And that's the trouble, that you might get like one piece of pure gold content that really is life-changing or career-changing. And then the rest of it is just like doom.
Well, that's the thing, isn't it? That's how gambling works. It's intermittent rewards. And that's all social media is intermittent rewards. You know, will that red number at the top of Facebook, is it something juicy? It might be a like, but it might be a message from my favorite friend from when I was 6 and they finally got in touch and they've got, you know. Yeah,
man, I know. And then, but there is so much positive in it that it's hard to get rid of, you know. So sometimes I'm just like, delete it. But it's like, no, because then you wouldn't have, you know, if you weren't on that, you wouldn't have found that great thing.
So I want to put one last thought in about, so we've reached the last point that I had, which was about random payouts, and about that being the most effective way of starting addiction, is like constantly, you know. And that's how lots of like Skinnerism behavior stuff works, is like, maybe I'll get praise this time, maybe I'll get a treat this time. And so I was like, oh, that's awful. I hate that. Well, I'm so glad that we work in the woods where the weather is different every time and all of the learners are different every time. And sometimes you have an incredible 5 minutes and then you have the worst 5 minutes of your day. And then you have an okay 5 minutes and then you have the next 5. And I was like, so I don't know whether it changes it that we're not in control of the intermittent reward, but that there's something about like forest school is intermittent reward. And like anyone who says that every forest school session they do is great is a fucking liar, because it's not great for everyone all of the time. There are tough moments and there are amazing moments, and that's really good. And so whether we need to like highlight, I was wondering what would happen if we highlighted that, highlighted the like random payouts for our learners. So if you and I were more vocal about going like, God, sunshine's come out now, isn't it? That's a bit of luck. Or like just referring more to
all the time.
Yeah, well, maybe I want to try and do it more consciously then. Like, oh, it was great that you all wanted to play that game. Well, I was really lucky, wasn't it, that that person brought that over? Or like, oh, who would have thought that that game would have led into that? What a you know, kind of highlighting the dopamine hits. And I wonder what that would do, whether sort of announcing it or making it more known would change addiction to forest school.
See, I feel like I do that all the time to the extent of possibly being annoying.
It's clearly not enough because I haven't picked up on it.
Oh, maybe it's when you're, you know, not with me.
The good things happen when I'm not there. I get it.
I don't know whether it's good or not, but I'm constantly offering a kind of like, oh, you know, I'm warm now. I was cold, and now I'm glad that I'm warm. Or the sun's come out.
That's
now.
like gratitude, though, isn't it?
Yeah, but not just gratitude. I think it's commenting on things, and yeah.
Do you think we highlight the other way though? Do you think we highlight and go, well, we tried it and it was shit?
Yeah, I think we do. I think I do about my personal stuff. I think I go, oh, well, that was a bit foolish what I did just there. I'm going to try that again because I obviously did that wrong. I think I narrate like that. Pole bridging. Deliberate pole bridging.
Okay, we'll leave it there. That was good. And otherwise we'll get addicted to
making content.
That's fine. You can be addicted to making content. Then you just end up like Stephen King with 800 books to your name. You know. Yeah. Right, I'm gonna go have some dinner.
Yeah. Bye.
Bye.
If you like this podcast and want to support more episodes, you can donate through Patreon. Visit patreon.com/Children of the Forest to show your support for the Forest School podcast.